Good morning. This is John Rhodes. I am the head of the New York State's Department of Public Service. Welcome to all of you who are joining us for our seminar or webinar on the Power Grid Study and Investment Plan. So thank you for joining us. We're here today to discuss our plans to accelerate renewable transmission delivery to ensure that renewable energy can be reliably and cost-effectively transmitted to meet the ambitious renewable development and emissions reduction goals of the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, or CLCPA. Notably, these goals include 70% renewable electricity by 2030 and 100% carbon-free electricity by 2040, as well as 9 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2035, all of which have major implications for transmission needs. I'd like to express my special thanks to Gil Quinones, President and CEO of the New York Power Authority, or NYPA, for joining us today. NYPA will play an integral role, which will be described in this critically important initiative. Today, you will hear from the staff of my agency, DPS, and of NYPA about our approach to streamlining the siting of transmission facilities. Broadly speaking, the work that we'll describe will address a few key salient points: identifying needed transmission projects, specifically identifying transmission projects which needs to be expedited, considering potential projects at both the bulk and at the local transmission and distribution levels, adaptations to our current planning process, if any might be needed, cost recovery approaches, particularly for so-called multi-value projects where there are many beneficiaries, cost containment and cost effectiveness, and the harnessing of technology. We're talking about transmission today. Beyond transmission, the state, of course, is already undertaking a lot of work to accelerate renewable generation, and the Act establishes an aggressive and a comprehensive approach to enable the reliable state-of-the-art grid, which you will hear about more this morning. So with that, thank you again for joining, and I turn the presentation over to Tammy Mitchell, Director at DPS of Office of Electric, Gas, and Water. Tammy, over to you.
Thank you, John. Good morning, everyone. As John mentioned, this is Tammy Mitchell. I'm the Director of the Office of Electric, Gas, and Water at the Department of Public Service. Again, as Chair Rhodes mentioned, today I will be discussing the state's plan to accelerate renewable transmission delivery pursuant to the Accelerated Renewable Energy Growth and Community Benefit Act. Next slide, please. So for the agenda today, I will first provide some background on the Act. Next, I'll discuss the Power Grid Study and Investment Plan. Then I will turn it over to Vincent Esposito, who will provide an overview of the New York Power Authority's role with respect to identified priority transmission projects. And finally, we'll open it up for questions. Just a reminder that participants can send in questions through the chat feature on WebEx at any time during this webinar, and we will address as many of those questions as we can at the end. Next slide, please. So turning to the background of the Accelerated Renewable Energy Growth and Community Benefit Act. Next slide. As we all know, Governor Cuomo has established the most ambitious renewable energy and greenhouse gas targets in the nation. John mentioned some of these targets, but I'll just repeat them. So the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, or CLCPA targets, include reducing greenhouse gas emissions from 1990 emissions levels 40% by 2030 and 85% by 2050, achieving 70% renewable energy generation by 2030 and 100% carbon neutral electric system by 2040, 9 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2035, 6 gigawatts of distributed solar by 2025, and 3 gigawatts of energy storage by 2030. In order to achieve these ambitious goals, renewable energy needs to be sited in a timely, balanced, and cost-effective manner. The Accelerated Renewable Energy Growth and Community Benefit Act, enacted in April, will expand and streamline renewable energy development. Next slide, please. The Act has three main pillars. The focus of today's webinar is the Power Grid Study and Investment Plan. This pillar requires the evaluation of the need for upgrades on the distribution, local transmission, and bulk transmission systems. Based on these results, the Public Service Commission will establish an investment plan for distribution and local transmission upgrades. The Commission will also identify bulk transmission projects that can be built through the New York ISO Order 1000 process and will identify those projects that must proceed on an expedited basis. For expedited bulk transmission projects, the New York Power Authority will construct such projects through competitively solicited partnerships. NYPA's role will be covered in more depth later in the webinar. The lead agencies for the Power Grid Study and the investment plan are the Public Service Commission, the department staff, and the New York Power Authority. I will touch briefly on the other two pillars of the Act as well. The Build Ready pillar focuses on incentivizing the reuse of previously developed sites for renewable energy facilities. The New York State Energy and Research Development Authority is the lead agency for this initiative. In order to make available build-ready sites for renewable energy developers, NYSERDA will acquire interests in land, conduct review of siting feasibility, secure permits, and auction the build-ready sites to developers with possible REC contracts. The final pillar of the Act is the establishment of the Office of Renewable Energy Siting. The lead agency for the new Office of Renewable Energy Siting will be the Department of State. The new office will develop and implement a streamlined permitting process for large-scale renewable energy projects in New York State, while also considering local laws, the environment, public health, and safety issues. Next slide, please. Now I'll talk in more detail about the Power Grid Study and Investment Plan called for in the Act. Next slide. The Power Grid Study and Investment Plan has three main components. There is the State Power Grid Study, which will evaluate needed upgrades on the distribution, local transmission, and bulk transmission systems. The results of the study or studies will inform two separate investment plans to be established by the Public Service Commission after public input on the results of the studies. One investment plan will be related to the distribution and local transmission investments or upgrades. Another plan will be related to the bulk system transmission investments. Next slide, please. So just a little more detail on the Power Grid Study. The goal of the Power Grid Study is to identify the necessary system investments needed to help the state meet the CLCPA goals. A key requirement of the Act is that the state evaluate the need for upgrades to the distribution, local, and bulk transmission systems to ensure that renewable generation is delivered to consumers in a cost-effective and efficient manner. So cost-effectiveness and efficiency are key considerations in this analysis. Next slide, please. So now I'll talk more about the Power Grid Study requirements and responsibilities of various entities. The Power Grid Study will identify distribution, local transmission, and bulk transmission upgrades necessary to achieve the state's clean energy goals, and will lead to the establishment of investment plan for distribution and local transmission upgrades. With respect to the bulk transmission system, the study will identify bulk transmission projects or public policy needs that can be pursued through the New York ISO Order 1000 process. And finally, the study will identify bulk transmission projects that must proceed on an expedited basis. The Act requires the Department of Public Service issue the results of the study within 270 days of the effective date of the Act, which would be the end of this year. However, the department may issue findings and recommendations from the study at any time before and after that date. The Act also requires that the Public Service Commission issue a comprehensive review of actions taken under Section 7 of the Act, which is the Power Grid Study and Program to achieve the CLCPA targets. That review will, among other things, look at the impacts on grid congestion and the achievement of the CLCPA targets as a result of implementing the investment plans developed out of the Power Grid Study. This review will be done by January 1st of 2023 and every 4 years thereafter, and will include a public comment process. Pursuant to the Act, the Public Service Commission can institute new proceedings to address any deficiencies identified related to addressing needed system upgrades. The Act also states that NYPA and NYSERDA may contribute to the cost of the Power Grid Study. Next slide, please. I'll now talk about some of the specific components of the Power Grid Study. The study will consider a number of factors when determining the upgrades and investments necessary for connecting major renewable energy facilities and eliminating electric system constraints. These factors include system reliability and safety and other traditional planning criteria. As I mentioned, the study will consider cost effectiveness of upgrades. For example, the bulk transmission system study will evaluate a full range of generation, transmission, and storage solutions and seek solutions that achieve the targets in a manner that provides adequate, reliable, and lowest system cost service to New York electric consumers. Another consideration in the study will be siting factors as identified in the Executive Law Section 94C for renewable siting permits. Additionally, the Power Grid study will consider information from various stakeholders, including owners and developers of competitive transmission projects, the ISO, and transmission technology and smart grid solution providers. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, based on the results of the Power Grid study related to distribution and local transmission, the Public Service Commission will develop a distribution and local transmission capital plan. Specifically, within 60 days of receipt of the results of the study, the PSC must commence a proceeding to establish a distribution and local transmission capital plan for each utility that the study identified for upgrades. The plan must include a prioritized schedule to accomplish identified distribution and local transmission upgrades for each utility. The PSC will address utility distribution and local transmission upgrades consistent with public service law, including through utility rate cases. The Act also calls upon the Long Island Power Authority, or LIPA, concurrently to establish a capital program for upgrades identified on its local transmission and distribution system. Next slide, please. The second investment plan that the Public Service Commission will establish is the Bulk Transmission System Investment Plan, which will be based on the results of the Power Grid study related to the bulk transmission system. Again, within 60 days of the receipt of the results of the Power Grid study, the PSC is required to establish a bulk transmission system investment program per the state siting authority over such assets. Based on the results of the study, the PSC will identify bulk investments needed to meet the CLCPA requirements. The PSC will set forth a prioritized schedule of identified bulk system investments and specifically identify investments that need to proceed expeditiously. These projects will be the priority projects. We'll talk more about priority projects and NYPA's role with respect to those projects on subsequent slides. As mentioned previously, the PSC will periodically review and update the investment plan based on progress toward meeting the CLCPA goals. Next slide, please. The PSC will also submit the Bulk Transmission System Investment Plan to the New York ISO for its use in the New York ISO's planning process. Specifically, the PSC will identify potential projects or public policy needs from the Bulk System Investment Plan for inclusion in the New York ISO's Public Policy Transmission Planning Process, or Order 1000 process, within 8 months of the commencement of that process. As mentioned, PSC will also identify priority projects from the investment plan that will be built by NYPA individually or in partnership with other parties, rather than selected through the New York ISO's Order 1000 competitive solicitation process. The Act provides a basis for the costs for such projects to be recovered by a formula rate filed by NYPA with the ISO and FERC. These projects do not include projects such as generator leads or repairs to, replacement of, or upgrades to the New York Power Authority's own transmission assets. Next slide, please. And now I will turn it over to Vincent Esposito from NYPA to talk more about the priority bulk transmission system projects and NYPA's role.
Thank you, Tammy. There are some opening remarks from my CEO, Gil Quinones. Gil, were you able to get back on?
Hello, I'm on. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, sir. Go ahead, Gil. I'm turning it over to you for some opening remarks.
Thank you. Thank you, Vince. Thank you, Tammy. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to everyone. This is Gil, the President and CEO of NYPA. I hope your families and friends are safe and well. I want to thank you all for joining today's webinar. We are pleased to partner with the Department of Public Service to host this webinar to provide a brief overview of Section 7 of the Accelerated Renewable Energy Growth and Community Benefit Act, also known as Renewable Siting Act, or in short, just the Siting Act. So this act was passed into law just about a month ago. We are proud to be part of this nation-leading enactment aimed at the acceleration of renewable energy in our state. It authorizes the Power Authority to help on what's called priority transmission projects found by the Commission to be needed expeditiously to achieve our CLCPA targets. We will now have an opportunity to partner with our sister state agencies, our utilities here in our state, private sector developers, and other stakeholders to collectively modernize the energy highway in New York and to help can achieve our very aggressive CLCPA targets. This opportunity to work together on transmission projects through this thoughtful approach will really help ensure that more New Yorkers have access to affordable energy that is becoming cleaner and healthier every day. As you have heard from Tammy, my colleague Vince Esposito from our law department is going to provide an overview of the particulars on NYPA's role under Section 7. Back to you, Vince. Take it away.
Thank you very much, Gil. Good morning, everyone. My name is Vince Esposito. As Gil indicated, I'm an Assistant General Counsel with the New York Power Authority. I've been asked to provide a brief overview of Subdivision 5 of Section 7 of the Siting Law, which assigns certain responsibilities to the New York Power Authority regarding priority transmission projects, which will be identified in the bulk transmission investment plan that Tammy Mitchell mentioned in her presentation. At the conclusion of my remarks, the audience will have an opportunity to use the chat window feature on the WebEx platform to pose questions. There'll also be an opportunity to pose questions and get answers to those questions after the close of today's webinar. And there'll be more information about that toward the end. For the sake of organization, we have developed 2 slides on Subdivision 5, which is quite short relative to the rest of the Siting Act. Slide 1 provides some context for NYPA's role, and slide 2 summarizes some of NYPA's key authorizations and responsibilities under Subdivision 5. Can we go to the first slide, please? Thank you. As Ms. Mitchell mentioned, the Bulk Transmission Investment Plan will identify bulk transmission investments that are necessary to help the state reach the CLCPA targets. Those projects will include priority transmission projects the Commission determined should be developed expeditiously. The legislature has determined that a public policy purpose would be served and the interests of the people of the state of New York would be advanced by authorizing the Power Authority by itself or in collaboration with other parties to undertake priority transmission projects identified in the Bulk Transmission Investment Plan. This approach, as indicated in the legislation, is intended to leverage NYPA's key strengths, including its technical expertise, financial stability, and access to capital to help bring needed priority transmission improvements across the finish line efficiently and cost effectively. The enactment gives the NYPA Board of Trustees the authority to determine what priority transmission projects NYPA will next slide, please. For priority transmission projects that are not substantially within a NYPA right-of-way, NYPA will conduct a competitive bidding process to seek potential partnerships with other parties. The enactment authorizes NYPA to determine the terms and the conditions of any participation arrangement, and any proposed participation arrangement is subject to the approval of NYPA's Board of Trustees. It's anticipated that for most priority transmission projects, NYPA will solicit private sector interest and, as determined to be appropriate, select partners through a competitive bidding process to participate in priority transmission project development throughout the state. This concludes my part of the presentation. We will now provide an opportunity for questions on the matters that Tammy and I discussed today.
So I see a question here. How will you determine which projects need to be done on an expedited basis versus the Order 1000 process? So the Commission will review and determine which projects are needed expeditiously and which projects are appropriate for the Order 1000 process. That review will be based on preliminary or final results of the bulk transmission study that I mentioned that are underway. Another question, will the participants get a copy of these slides? The webinar has been recorded and will be available in the future, I believe. I see a question for the requirement to respond to the New York ISO. There's an 8-month requirement. Is that from the next Order 1000 process or the current one? So the Order 1000 process kicked off in 2018, August, I believe, and that process is still open. Nothing prohibits the Commission from acting within that current process. So again, the Commission will be looking at preliminary results from the ongoing studies.
I see a question here. Will NYPA be the owner of any of the new transmission lines or solar or wind projects that are being built, or will they just be funding partners in these ventures. I'm not in a position to comment on solar and wind projects, which is not the topic of today's discussion, but I expect NYPA will be an owner or part owner of new priority transmission projects that would be constructed under the Siting Act.
I see a couple questions related to local transmission and distribution projects, whether those would be approved within a rate case or through some other process. Certainly, rate cases are one mechanism that the PSC can utilize to approve local transmission and distribution projects as part of the utilities capital plans, but nothing prohibits the Commission from instituting a separate proceeding or authorizing those investments outside of the rate case.
I see a question here on the President's executive order issued on Friday. I think it's probably safe to assume that most state agencies in the energy sector here are still studying that order and don't have any comment on it at this time. There's a question here about project being done by NYPA. Does that mean that it skips the competitive portion of the FERC order? I believe the answer to that question is yes. NYPA will manage a competitive process for those projects, and other priority projects identified in the bulk transmission investment plan will go through the 1009 will go through the FERC Order 1000 process. Nevertheless, NYPA and its partners will submit an application through the NYSO for cost allocation and recovery.
I see a question here related to the 60-day requirement. The 60 days is for the Commission to commence a proceeding to establish the capital investment plans, both for local and distribution as well as the bulk system plan. So again, that 60-day requirement is upon completion of the study, but again, the Act allows for the Commission to commence those proceedings at any time prior to that as well.
There's a question here about cost recovery for the projects that NYPA partners with. I presume that applications will be made under existing tariffs for cost recovery. NYPA would probably proceed under its formula rate, and the third of any partner with NYPA would proceed under its formula rate if it has one, or it would propose some type of rate structure for recovery. There's a question here: what will be the expected contractual arrangements between NYPA and private partners for bulk transmission projects? I think that's probably to be determined on a project-by-project basis, so I can't really sort of opine on how that'll be handled at this time, particularly in the abstract. Can NYPA undertake priority projects without a competitive process? I imagine there'll be instances where it could, if it chose to do so. For projects that are not substantially within its right-of-way, we expect NYPA to issue a competitive process or implement a competitive process to seek partners.
I see a question that preliminary findings may be issued prior to late 2020. Is it known what type of data or findings may be ready for the public in advance? So as I mentioned, we may have preliminary results earlier than the end of the year, perhaps in the fall, and there may be an opportunity for public stakeholder engagement on that prior to finalizing the results. I see a question: will there be coordination between Build Ready, NYSERDA site selection, and the Power Grid study and investment plan? One of the considerations, as I mentioned, in the Power Grid study is siting. So yes, there will be some coordination there. There's another question with respect to the implications of a law for offshore and transmission planning. So part of the bulk system study is a look at offshore transmission planning as well. For local transmission, will the Public Service Commission consider NYSERDA funding or other state funding to align cost recovery with beneficiaries? I think, as you heard Commissioner Rhodes mention earlier, we will be looking at various funding mechanisms and planning processes going forward. What is the time frame for the study? Are needs being looked at to achieve the 2040 goals? The studies are looking at the 2040 timeframe as well as timeframes in between now and then, including a 2030 look. In addition to the priority projects, will the study also identify longer-term projects? Yes, the study will be looking again at 2030, at 2040, so it will consider all transmission upgrades that would achieve the CLCPA goals. from that identified list, the commission will prioritize those projects. What's the timing of the grid study? Again, the target is the end of the year. Some preliminary results may be available by fall. Question here about what constitutes local upgrades. So again, we're identifying 3 categories of projects. Those are the bulk system projects that will be expedited. There are the bulk system projects that would qualify or be targeted for the ISO process. And the New York ISO has a definition of what bulk system upgrades are. And so that leaves the 3rd category, which is the local transmission and distribution projects. Statement that it sounds like nothing will commence permitting for 3 to 4 years. We need a study, a rate case, et cetera. That is not the case. As we have stated, we are well underway with these studies. We expect to have results this year. The Act calls for the Public Service Commission to commence proceedings no later than 60 days after the results of those studies, but are allowed to commence those proceedings any time before that. And the intent is to expedite projects. That's the intent of the law, and that's our intent as we go forward. I have more questions related to the public policy transmission planning process and whether anything may go through the current window, which is the process that was initiated in 2018. Again, the idea is to identify projects as soon as we have results available, and if any are identified that would be suitable to go through the process for this year, the commission can still use that process. The question regarding implications for merchant transmission, again, using the Order 1000 process would allow for participation by merchant transmission developers.
Question here, LIPA's role in the process. I think the enactment pretty much explains LIPA's role. You just refer to the enactment.
A question about public on the studies. Again, we will be seeking comments on some of the output of the study, and as called for, the commission will be instituting 2 proceedings, which will entail a formal comment process as well.
Tammy, before we forget, did we want to identify an email to which questions can be sent after the conclusion of the webinar?
Vince, I believe that was at the end of the webinar, the last slide, and that email is james.denn, D-E-N-N, @dps.ny.gov.
Thank you.
I have another question about offshore transmission. Again, offshore wind implications on transmission is being studied as part of the bulk study. There's a question here about the grid study and New York ISO's CARIS report. So, been coordinating with the New York ISO and looking to be consistent with some of the inputs and assumptions. It is a separate study, so there may be different scenarios, but we are using that information. What's the target date to have priority transmission projects in service? An in-service date has not been established for priority projects. Again, the process will be to identify needed projects, to prioritize them, and then look at the timing as far as permitting and construction. So thank you all. We've gotten lots of great questions. I see that there are probably some others that people would like to put out there. But at this point, we're going to wrap up. We provided an email for additional questions to be sent to, and we welcome those questions. We will get back to you on those. We do want you all to be involved in the process, and this is one step. So thank you for your time today, and we look forward to working with you all in the near future.
On behalf of NYPA, thank you very much for your participation.